Hello, and welcome to the Story Partners podcast. We are your hosts, Walt and Annie Manus. We're so glad you're here.
We're a team of storytellers who seek to tell stories that point people to Jesus.
Our friend Graham used to work as an audio tech for the band Metallica. At that time, his life revolved around partying, women, and drugs. Over time, he lost everything and found himself wanting to end his own life, until he received an invitation that changed everything. This episode is called The Persistent Invitation.
At the start of the year 2000, I found myself wanting to end my life. My life had crumbled around me. I had lost everything through some terrible circumstances. I was very depressed. I was in a terrible situation emotionally. I was such a hard-hearted man in my life. I'd have never, ever considered God, or certainly not Jesus. I thought he was a joke. I thought he didn't have anything to do that was good for me in my life. I was in someone's house and I was just chatting away with this person, and I looked up and I saw this postcard and I realised it was an invitation, and I read this invitation. It was to go to an event. As I read this invitation to this event and the date and the time, I heard an audible voice in my heart say, "You've got to be at this." I was really shocked when I heard this. I thought this was just crazy. Well, I was back at this person's house about a week later, and this postcard was still there. I happened to look up and notice it again. And a second time, I heard this voice say, "You've got to be at this." And it actually happened a third time. A few days after that, it was still there. And this voice spoke to me. By then, I knew, like I'd never known anything in my life, that I had to be at whatever this was. And I didn't know what it was going to be. And so I picked up this postcard and took it with me. And the event was on April the 27th, the year 2000. And I went along to it, just like this voice had told me. And I went into the back of this big room, and it was a big auditorium, and there was clearly an event going on, and it was a church that had put this on. And I went and sat in the back row. I didn't want to speak to anyone. And I could hear music coming through the speakers before the event started. And the music was speaking about Jesus, songs about Jesus. And I sat there and thought, what on earth has Jesus got to do with anything? This must be a joke. Why am I here? I couldn't understand it. And as they began to worship God and sing about Jesus, I found myself beginning to weep and cry. This love descended upon my head, and it was like a globe all around my head is the best way to describe it, like a sphere around my head and the tops of my shoulders. And at one point I put my hands up into it near my head, and I touched the love of heaven. I can still feel it now on my fingertips when I recount this story. And at one point I felt my jeans, and they were soaking wet with the tears. I was crying, and as I was crying and weeping, and these songs about Jesus were filling the air all around me, this voice said, "I'm dealing with everything you've ever done. I'm forgiving it, and I'm restoring you." And then this voice said, "And everything that's ever been done to you, I'm healing you, and I'm putting you right." This audible voice said to me, "I want you." And at that point, I was still on my knees. And I said to this voice, "But who are you?" And this voice said, "I'm Jesus." I said, "Well, I want you, but I don't understand how to have you. I'd never encountered anything like this in my life before. All I knew was that my life on the spot was being transformed." It was almost as if God had to allow everything to be stripped away in my life before I would hear his voice and answer his call. I'd met with Jesus, encountered Jesus in this time that I'd spent with him, and I knew that I had to be his. Well, I ran up to the front of that meeting to give my life, to ask God to receive me as his too. And that night, on April the 27th, year 2000, my entire life changed.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. We hope that it encourages you this week.
If you enjoyed it, we'd really appreciate it if you'd follow this podcast, as well as rate and review the episode for us. This helps a lot with new people finding us.
We also wanted to give a big thanks to Elijah Delgado for providing our show music.
Elijah is a local artist here in Austin and also our friend. So be sure to check out his work wherever you stream your music.
Did you know that we also produce short films? Subscribe to our YouTube channel to follow those. Thank you for listening to this episode. We hope to see you on the next one. Until then.